Hello and welcome to JSB Talks Digital, the podcast for marketers, digital transformation champions, and those of you bringing your skills into the digital age. I'm Joanne Sweeney-Burke and this podcast is brought to you by Digital Training Institute. In this episode, number 103, I bring you to Mojofest in Galway, attended by over 300 international journalists and mobile content creators. I also take you on stage with me. Coming up in today's show, in social media news, Facebook bug results in private messages being shared publicly. Instagram reveals how its algorithm works, and lip-syncing Musical.ly style comes to Facebook. I interview Laura Byrne, journalist and podcaster with Storyful. In shoutouts, 3 mobile storytelling tips. Ask JSB comes from the EU Parliament this week. In JSB's column, I bring you on stage at Mojofest and find out what social media tool saved my working week.
Social media news.
Facebook is in social media hot water once again. It's emerged that the posts of over 14 million users who thought they were sharing privately with their friends may have actually been shared publicly because of a software bug during the month of May 2018. It has been a hell of a year for Facebook so far. Only weeks after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the company is facing yet another major PR crisis. Facebook has admitted publicly that the posts of these 14 million users were shared publicly when in actual fact they should have been shared privately in Messenger. According to the company, a software bug automatically updated the audience for some users' posts from friends only to public without any warning for the user. It's believed that the bug was live for a period of 10 days or more during the month of May. It's more than lip service Facebook is playing to Musical.ly. They've just gone and copied the app's core feature. Lip Sync Live, which will essentially be a direct competitor to existing lip syncing platforms like Musical.ly, is coming to Facebook. Testing it in select markets, the feature is part of Facebook's strategy to make music a bigger part of its platform. The company says hundreds of songs will be immediately available, including those by Camila Cabello, Guns N' Roses, Drake, Ed Sheeran, and many more. With Lip Sync Live, you can express yourself with music from a variety of genres in real time. There's no stopping Instagram's growth right now. And last week, the Facebook-owned social network addressed a room full of tech journalists to explain how its algorithm works. Basically, it zones in on 3 core signals. Firstly, interest. The algorithm will determine how interested you're likely to be in each individual post by first factoring in how much you've engaged with similar content in the past. For this, Instagram looks at how much each user engages with image and video posts. Interestingly, the algorithm will also assess the actual visual content of posts facilitated by Instagram's evolving image recognition tools. Secondly, it talks about timeliness. Instagram factors in when the post was published. And finally, relationship. This is the last major factor you want to be aware of. The factors used in this calculation could include common interactions like comments and likes on each other's posts, but also direct messages and post tags.
Interview.
In this episode, I interview Laura Byrne, senior journalist and podcaster with Storyful. Storyful is a social insights and content company that combines world-class journalism, proprietary technology, and unique access to data to find valuable insights and content for media and brand partners. I caught up with Laura recently at Mojofest, where she interviewed me. But I wanted to take the opportunity to interview her all about mobile journalism and content creation.
JSB Talks Digital.
Laura Byrne from Storyful, thank you so much for joining me on JSB Talks Digital. I am now turning around the interview tables on you.
Thanks, Joanne, for having me.
So let's talk about what some of my listeners might not be familiar with, but social media journalism. It is actually a thing, and it's also on the rise. And you could argue that Storyful were an early adopter. So what were your beginnings, and how are you positioning yourselves in this new field of storytelling and journalism?
Well, you're right. Who would have thought that social media journalism would become a thing? But yeah, Storyful, we are essentially the first social media news agency and a global news agency at that. Now, it was set up in 2010 by Mark Little. He's a former RT journalist. Many people would know of him. Now, Mark was covering the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he noticed that while he and his team had to bring heavy equipment into sites to cover these events, that kind of thing, the growing prevalence of the smartphone was changing the way that information was coming through. So if you think of it, rather than correspondence from BBC, CNN, all these large broadcasters spending a lot of time and money getting to the scene of a news event, by the time, let's just say like the Haiti earthquake had struck in 2010, what was interesting about Haiti was that despite of all the devastation over there, Haitians had a lot of cell phones. So they were able to upload footage to the web. And it was starting to become apparent at that time that there was this wealth of content coming through with the potential for it to be used for news footage. So I guess Mark and the team at the time would have said, how do we as journalists based in Dublin or wherever we are, how could we best access this footage and then verify it so that we could send it to clients for use? It's very hard to know if it's trustworthy on the web. You know how crazy the web can be. So the model, I suppose, for Storyful in the early days, it would have been myself and a few really talented tech-minded journalists in Dublin and Hong Kong and New York, and a few techies thrown into the mix. And we would essentially troll the web for content for big news events. So you're talking about really monitoring Twitter lists, searches on Twitter and Facebook, that kind of thing, all pretty exhaustive stuff. Since then now, obviously, the company's grown hugely and we have our own proprietary technology to help with this kind of a search. But the ultimate aim here is to find original footage that the likes of you and I, an ordinary social media user, would have uploaded from the coalface of a big story. And what we do then as a group of journalists, we verify it, we sometimes license it, and we package it up to our clients. Now, our clients would be ABC, Al Jazeera, Euronews, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. These are big broadcasting and publishing groups. And I guess, our tagline here at Storyful has always been sort the news from the noise, because there's so much noise online, as we know, and on social media. The biggest challenge for anybody dealing with social media information is verification. And we've always taken that kind of very, very seriously. And this is where the investigative part of our jobs come in. We would be on satellite maps. We would be on Google Maps all day. We could spend a whole day looking at a high value video, say from Syria, and looking at the angle of the sun over a mosque. We'd be looking at, local businesses. We'd be following them locally. And then the main thing is that we find out who this uploader is. Who are they? Can we trust them? Can we get a hold of them? Can we contact them and see what's happening on the ground? So yeah, news from noise is what we say. We've been doing it for a while now.
You come from a traditional broadcast background, radio specifically. How has your job changed, or how has your job not changed with the smartphone revolution?
You know what? I would say it's changed utterly in practical terms. Possibly has changed in no way in terms of my approach as a journalist, and I think that's really important to remember. In terms of how, what way we work, it has changed. Like, I was 15 years ago, I started in radio, and we had flip phones back then. And remember the flip phone? A text, and it rang someone, and that was it, and nothing else happened. Since then, obviously, the smartphone has revolutionised how we report events. So, if we were out at a press conference or some other marking, at the time we would have had mini disc recorders, Marantz, a laptop. You would have sat on a step probably with wires hanging out of you, filed the audio, recorded your voice there and sent it back to base. And in fairness, for those few years, that was pretty advanced tech for a lot of radio stations, and it worked really well. Along came the smartphone, obviously, and then Facebook and Twitter came into play. So I would say that I was at Today FM at the time in the newsroom there, and we were all filing away Godot on Twitter and Facebook for possibly a year or two before any of editors, managers, people in charge started to realize that, social media gets a lot of attention, and a lot of our staff are on social media and they're all journalists, and we better bring some rules in around that. So after a year or two, I think we all became we started realizing we are publishing stuff here online. This is not just sharing my daily thoughts about whatever particular event. I would have left Today FM 6 years ago, and by that time social media, it was becoming a big factor. We were updating maybe press conferences in real time on our Twitter feeds, that kind of things. But the use of live video wouldn't have been a factor at that point. I don't think journalists were filing live video like that. Now, when I came to Storyful, it's like my exposure and my understanding of social media just ramped up to such an extent. I'll be honest, I was overwhelmed. I could not believe the depth of investigative work that was going on here, and the model, the level of detail that was needed. We'd open browsers, as I say, we've had Twitter lists, we'd have Google Maps, Facebook searches. The Arab Spring, I think, would have been the biggest story around the time that I came in, and it was just fascinating. I think, when you think of all of these activists who are on the ground, and these could be ordinary young students, they're so technologically advanced in their knowledge, and they were able to feed in all of these videos of, they're living their ordinary lives, and suddenly their lives are turned upside down. And it's really admirable, the amount of work that these people were able to put out there. Now, I was using my smartphone by this stage. It was a handy tool, obviously, for all of us to document our own lives. But when you see giving, I hate this is probably, this tagline is overused, but giving voice to the voiceless, it was such an amazing tool to give an ordinary person a way of telling their own stories. Really, when the Syria war started, I thought it was very interesting, because it became really apparent at that point that mainstream media was not going to get anywhere near what was happening in Syria. It was too dangerous. It was just too murky. And I think that really is the point. The Arab Spring and the Syrian war, that's when the smartphone really came into its own. And that's essentially where the Storyful team here, we came into our own, because we developed out our systems and our ability to kind of talk to people on the ground and develop relationships with them.
It's quite remarkable. You mentioned the Marantz, and that brings me way back to my radio days, and also how easy it was to verify a story. When I was a journalist 18 years ago, I learned shorthand and touch typing and radio production and reporting. But journalists of today are multimedia technicians, and they are in the field. It's definitely a new skill set, right? And it's much more difficult to verify a story.
Exactly. And that's the thing, John, you and I come from that era where, it was fairly straightforward. The lines were very clear. You knew who was doing what. Now it's just this whole area of, as again, noise, and I have to say, I admire reporters nowadays. They're out in the field. They're under incredible pressure. They're not just feeding stuff back to the base, back to their editors, which is what you and I did, but they have to keep their own social media feed updated, possibly their own company's feed. I don't envy them. They're out on scene. They're trying to gather all the information. It's difficult, I think, to switch off. I was thinking recently, I see a lot of former colleagues of mine, and they look like they live on social media 24/7. They're out at whatever political events. And I think one thing we've all learned here, especially with the kind of hothousing work that we've done here in Storyful, is you've got to be clear about the boundaries between you and your smartphone and you and your workflow. Just on a personal level, I think that's an important thing. But as you say, news is 24/7 now. It's ramped up, and broadcasters themselves are under severe pressure to keep up with what's happening on social media. I do think, though, it's very, very important still to make sure that you are right. I know everybody's under pressure to be first, but some large broadcasters have been caught out, especially around big news stories, maybe things like terror attacks, that it is important that you're accurate. And that's one thing I would advise young reporters now. Don't get caught up in the frenzy, the social media frenzy that's out there, and to be kind of, oh well, I've got to be here first. If you get it wrong, it's really hard to recover from that. You've got to be accurate. Verify is what we always say to ourselves here. I would say also for old school journalists like myself, the important thing is not to be intimidated by the technology of the moment. I think embrace it. The tech is so great now. There's so many things happening, and it can look like pretty intimidating, but if you embrace it, it'll make your life so much easier. If you don't be afraid of it. You can put documentaries together now on your phone. There's like iMovie, Luma, Fusion, all of these apps, and they're there for the taking. They're very easy to use. So dive right in, I would say.
And you've gone back behind the mic because you're now the producer and presenter of the Storyful podcast. How does it feel being back on air, if you like?
Oh, I have to say, you become a bit of a radio junkie over the years, and I left radio kind of happy enough to put it in the back burner for a while. And I love all the work we've done here at Storyful, but I am back in my happy place doing some broadcasting. It's just, I think when you get the buzz for broadcast, like you probably understand it yourself, it's such a lovely experience. And I have to say, the tech changing has really helped the process. As I said, if we're going to build a studio hopefully here soon enough, but at the moment, we're using our iPhones. We're, using as many apps as we can. We're still using a Zoom and a microphone. The old school part of me still wants that microphone in hand going into something kind of solid, but we use our iPhones as backup, and we're editing when we're stuck. And obviously reaching out to guests and that kind of thing is amazing using the new tech. So yeah, I'm happy out.
Let's talk about then the type of content that your customers want. They're large media companies like ABC and the Wall Street Journal. So for a content creator like me, and many of my listeners are content creators, what are they looking for? Because that might spark some ideas for us as content creators.
Well, as you say, Joanne, most of our customers, they're journalists. So we, first of all, have to make sure that everything is accurate. And verify is the key. We would serve clients a huge amount of videos covering anything from hard news events, weather events, and even viral videos. Anything from dancing cats, singing babies, you name it. We've got a massive database of that kind of stuff. I think the hard news videos are consistently the ones with the most uptake, but that, again, is down to the type of client that we serve. Obviously, you have got to understand who your audience is, and I think that's always the best advice for anyone who's going out there to create content or broadcast. Think about the person you're talking to or the people you want to talk to. If I'm a client, say, of Storyful in a busy newsroom somewhere and I'm monitoring a breaking story, well, Storyful will feed me that UGC, and I'd like to think I can hope that it is verified and it's cleared. Now, what's interesting lately is we have a news intelligence service launched, and we have a team providing analysis and intelligence relating to stories. Now, this involves analysing keywords and phrases that are used about a given topic. I think this is a whole new world, really, for if anyone's interested in creating content around data. This is something that's worth exploring. What we do is we have key people sharing material relating to topics, like I said, say like an election. We did a lot of work, say recently, around the abortion rights referendum here in Ireland, and we would have served up data-driven analytics for our clients. Now, it sounds really intense, and it is, but when you can uncover the use of fake profiles online, people who, there's a lot of people with agendas. As we all know, we're in the era of fake news. There's a lot of people trying to muddy the waters a little bit. So we've developed out ways to kind of spot the disinformation campaigns, and we would monitor kind of fringe platforms like 4chan and Gab. There's a lot going on in those. I would see this work definitely as something that's going to grow in the future. And again, I don't think there's any difference between this and old school investigative journalism. It's just you're using different tools, but you're applying the same model, and you have to be kind of, I guess the way to approach it is to just don't trust anything you see until you know you're on top of it. So the news intel work, dig deep. Again, like if anyone's creating content, my advice to anyone is always start with what you know. Don't dive into something you've no interest in. So start building out your abilities there, and build up your Twitter following, and let them follow your hashtags and join the conversation and build it out from there, I'd say.
So what new trends are evolving that Storyful is tapping into? Because obviously you've got to be at the cutting edge of the digital revolution and how news and news dissemination is evolving.
Yeah, it's funny. We would run a 24/7 newsroom. We have teams all over the world now, and we run everything using a series of apps. So technically, if my laptop decides to pack it in tomorrow, I could, in theory, work on my phone. We use Intercom, Slack, Google Hangouts. We would work on a permanent Google Hangout. So if I were logging in to Dublin, I would be working with the team in Hong Kong, and we see and speak to each other. And we have these virtual newsrooms, I guess. Using a smartphone a lot now. As I said, we use that for the podcast. In terms of what uploaders and activists are using, I think we're seeing a lot more live footage. Obviously, last year we saw a lot of, we saw people being shot live on Facebook Live. There's a lot of stuff being documented on live footage. 360 footage is coming into play a lot more because the tech has improved. And of course, the use of drones. Drones are a massive thing now, and obviously that brings its own challenges around safety and that kind of thing. But uploaders, I guess, they're not even journalists, but they've become so much more savvy with the tech that they're using. And I think there's also an understanding among quote unquote ordinary social media users of the value of footage. So we would license a lot of footage, and if you think of it, we had, say, a Czech taxi driver who filmed Hillary Clinton when she fainted at Ground Zero there during the presidential campaign in the US. We licensed the footage for him, and by all reports, he's earned well into six figures with this footage. Now, that's high value. That does not happen every day if you get footage of your cat standing on its hind legs, so that's within reason. But I think that ordinary social media users now understand what value these kinds of videos have. And that can be an interesting way for, it's an interesting thing. I did see one video though last year, which made me nervous, of a young man was filming an elderly couple as they walked towards the seashore. And next thing, a huge wave came along and dragged the poor elderly couple in. And meanwhile, our video filming guy is standing there with his iPhone filming the entire time while other people rush in to save them. So there is a kind of, this kind of activity has to come with proviso that you must also be aware of what's happening in real time.
I was going to ask you what equipment you couldn't live without. So the smartphone is obviously the central piece of equipment in your toolbox. Is there any other piece of hardware? I mean, we know the software that you can't live without.
I think, I had a 24-hour period there where I left my phone in someone's house and I was like losing a limb. And then on one level, it's a great way to have some peace and quiet. So I think, we're all pretty addicted to our smartphones these days. As I said, we're still using the Zoom recorder. It's probably one step up from the Marantz. I get nervous if I just use my iPhone. I have used my iPhone audio and it has helped, if something goes wrong with the Zoom. The laptop obviously is another thing, but no, I think, it's terrible to say, but the phone is it, it's apart from a stand for making movies and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's it. It's tragic.
So let's give some really good advice to the content creators out there, because you've been doing it all your life and now in the context of social journalism. What tips would you give them to try and engage and optimize content for the social web? Because it's one thing creating it, but then it's got to be discovered and engaged with, right?
Exactly, yeah. And, again, there's a kind of a fine line between doing something you're interested in and then having three people listen to it or read it. So you've got to always be thinking about what way you want to put it forward. I would say get researching. Research, first of all, the best apps that you can use to help you. Join as many Facebook groups that you can. There's a brilliant Mojofest or MojoCon group in terms of, your tech, if you want to get involved in that kind of, and they're amazing, that group, for advice. Start covering what you know. It's very tempting for, say, young content creators to say, right, well, what's everyone talking about? The World Cup. I'll talk about the World Cup. Oh no, I know nothing about sport and I've no interest in it. Don't do it to yourself. It'll break your heart. Start with what you're passionate about. Start writing about it. Start blogging about it. Load as much content as you can to YouTube. Get your Twitter feed going. Talk about what you're passionate about. Follow the hashtags. Think of it as your public face, your public CV. That's the way, in my day, I guess, we weren't doing it online, but I started working for a local magazine for free, and I did a youth supplement for them, and I loved every minute of it, and I was putting it all together myself, and that got my kind of enthusiasm going, and it gave me confidence. I think you have to think about building your confidence as well. I would say really, really important though is that the fundamentals of telling a story will never change regardless of what you're doing. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, they're a must, and there are no exceptions. You've always got to have some sort of structure to what you're doing. Don't just kind of jump in and say, here, I'm going to waffle about this. There's a difference between being, maybe a blogger who wants to just chat about something and maybe approaching it from a journalism angle. So think about what you're doing there. And if it is from a journalism angle, I would say that the fundamentals of journalism should never change. You've got to be professional. If you're publishing online, if you're putting anything online, even your own personal Facebook page, you are publishing. I can't tell people that enough whether they're journalists or not. You are putting something out into the public for dissemination. So always be professional.
What's the biggest learning that you've taken from your time at Storyful? You've entered a whole new world of journalism that really didn't exist 10 years ago. So what can you share with us in terms of your biggest insight?
I would say, as I say, it's changed so much in the last few years, but what's really come to me from that is that the world is such a small place now, and that, social media, it's had so many controversies, and rightly so, and it has caused problems, and we have all the debates to have about fake news and its impact on democracy and all of that, and there's a lot of learning to be had there. But just the fact that it has enabled so many people around the world to be heard, to tell their story. We wouldn't know about the human rights abuses in Syria over the last few years were it not for the smartphone. And if you think about that, if you think about, say, what's happening in Yemen, there's very little that's being heard from Yemen because Yemen is a pretty impossible place to get UGC from. So we have heard what we would never have heard about possibly before from Syria. And I think it's actually mind-blowing, really, that the amount of information. I think, though, also, and I keep saying this, I know, Joanna, and apologies, but objectivity, integrity, and critical thinking, all the principles of journalism, they matter now more than ever. It's so easy to take in all of this information that's floating around, but you have got to be the best filter for the people you're sending it on to. We're now in this crazy world of fake news. It's now more than ever, we have got to keep our feet on the ground, take a deep breath, don't fly in, and verify.
Oh, Laura Byrne, an absolute pleasure to speak to a former broadcast journalist and now fellow podcaster. And you bring some amazing insights and such great reminders to us all that while we can all be citizen journalists and have our say, and we don't need to go through the mainstream journalism channels to get published, but still the same rules and responsibilities remain. And I think, I tell you what, this will be a podcast that I'll be advising people to go back to time and time again. Brilliant insights, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on JSB Talks Digital. And where can people find you online?
So thanks, Joanne, and it's been great chatting to you today. Yeah, you can find the Storyful podcast on Facebook and Twitter, and it's on all the audio feeds.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Joanne.
Shoutouts.
In this part of the show, I give shout-outs to brands, organisations or individuals whose work online is remarkable and worth talking about. In this episode, my shout-outs go to mobile content creators. I want to share 3 things that we can learn from them.
1.
Authenticity is a word perhaps overused right now, but it's important for me to use it in this first Mojo tip. Much of what we see right now in digital marketing is pushing people through a funnel. And then we almost become over-planned and less spontaneous, which then leads us to be less authentic. Audiences are smart and they can see right through an ad. Mobile content creators remind us that the audience should be front and centre of the stories we tell, and it should also appeal to their emotional senses. So, tip 1 is always create with your audience in mind.
2.
I used to create DVDs and work with film crews in the early days of my career. Hell, I was even in a reality TV show. So I know how perfectly produced video should be made. But in the digital age of the smartphone, we don't want to see this level of production on our smartphones. We want to see the rough cut story. We want to see rough diamonds because in mobile storytelling, they are like gold dust.
3,
When we are in campaign mode online, we can very quickly forget about raw content opportunities. When you are a mobile content creator, you realise that the moments of least anticipation are those when we can capture the magic. So, I'm calling this tip seeking out content opportunities in micro moments. I would argue that I've perfected this technique. So I'm always wired to hear, see, or be part of a great story that I can share with you. And of course, I always have my trusted iPhone and Zoom H1 in the handbag for any great content opportunity.
Ask JSB.
This week's question for Ask JSB comes from press advisors working in the EU Parliament. I was delivering a workshop on how to turn your PR event into a live stream opportunity. So their question to me was, when do you decide that a PR tactic is in fact a live stream opportunity? My answer to them was very simple. Don't live stream something for the sake of it. Every live stream should have one clear message and it also should have one clear goal. This may be informing your audience about a particular issue or driving your audience to your website, for example. Too often I see people sitting in their cars with their seatbelt or on the go and live streaming for the sake of live streaming. So from the press advisor's point of view, if they are putting their MEP front of screen, they have to make sure to a certain extent that it is a little bit planned. Don't forget, if you have a burning social media or digital marketing question, simply click on digitaltraininginstitute.ie/askjsb and leave me a voicemail. You can also send me your questions to any of our social networks.
JSB's column.
In today's JSB's column, I bring you on stage with me at Mojofest in Galway, where I spoke about content creation, influence, and discoverability in the age of the smartphone.
JSB Talks Digital.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. This is my alma mater. I studied journalism here about 18 years ago, and I always wanted to be a storyteller. So when deciding on what career I would take, I said, well, who's going to pay me to write and to tell stories? So I decided to become a journalist, but nobody told me that the money in journalism wasn't very good. And when I came here to college, I was 19 years of age and my daughter was 2. So being financially independent was something that was very important to me. So fast forward 18 years and I'm still telling stories and I'm still getting paid for it. I'm now, I guess, essentially a digital marketing consultant and trainer. And for the past 2 days, I spent in Google in Madrid delivering their mobile masterclass to some of the world's biggest brands. And what's very interesting is the dichotomy of the people in this room and the people on this stage and how we approach storytelling and how we approach commercializing what you have and finding your niche. So the niche that I tapped into was, I guess, bringing the organizations and the institutions of the state into the digital age. My presentation of my title, if you can put it on screen, is why the balance of power now lies with influencers in the digital age. Power once lay with politicians, police forces, policymakers, CEOs, and let's face it, the church. The smartphone is 10 years old today, and if we think about society here in Ireland, but also internationally, society has also changed. We've just come out of a major referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment, which was successful, and overwhelmingly so. 8 weeks ago, I decided to analyse the social conversations that were happening around this referendum, hugely divisive. It had experiences of fake news, and of course, RTE had an experience of them having a fake news story on Facebook, which was subsequently taken down. Obviously, they didn't write it. And what I saw 8 weeks ago was that the campaign that was promoting to repeal the 8th referendum had about a 200% increase on the opposing side. So I knew very quickly, by analysing the keywords, the emotional triggers, the emojis, and the sentiment around what people were saying around this debate, that I had an inclination that it would go the way that it did. So that's called social listening, and that's about tapping into the data, the big data that's available. We are now walking around with a piece of equipment, the iPhone, that has 250,000 patents. It's absolutely remarkable. The very first fully shot movie on a smartphone comes out this month in cinemas across the world. The reason that people on this stage, and I don't really call myself an influencer, are being able to commercialize what they do is because they understand how the internet works. They understand that consumers are no longer consumers. Consumers are now prosumers. People like me and you are able to dictate what we want because we have that power in the palm of our hand. We're impatient, we're demanding, and we're completely information hungry. We absolutely want to know what is there and to answer questions. And that's why when we step into a niche, we can actually own it. So when I'm teaching brands how to engage with ordinary people, I have to teach them how to stop selling. Because brands and public sector organizations go straight to the end of the funnel, right? And they want you to do something. Usually they want you to buy from you, to purchase. The world has changed, the narrative has changed. People want to have conversations. And the people here are having conversations with their audiences. So when I worked as a journalist in Highland Radio, one of the most newsy counties in the country, the Morris Tribunal broke. So this was a public investigation into allegations of wrongdoing against some of our police officers in my home county. So I sat through the hearings for 2 months, and they were very, very complex. But it taught me a lot about live broadcasting and making sure that I was factually correct. And those core skills of journalism have stood to me today. I then wrote a book when I was doing my master's in digital marketing 4 years ago. And I studied how police forces are using social media for crime investigation, public relations, and community engagement. And when I was looking for academic evidence to back up what I was finding and my own views and opinions, I couldn't find anything. And I spotted the gap. I spotted the gap on Google. Law enforcement and social media, nobody was owning the space. And I said, well, hey, I can do that, right? I have an interest. And then it led me to speaking at a policing conference 3 years ago in Phoenix, Arizona, to chiefs of police from across the United States and Canada. The Pentagon was there. They bought 3 copies of my book. Unfortunately, I could only take 27 copies of my book with a baggage allowance across to America. And niche is just so important. And if you can have conversations and if you can answer the questions that people are searching for now in Google, but more and more so by using voice, you can own and you can control. Brands and organizations are failing to step into the digital age. Fear is paralyzing their progress, and the institutions of the state are really suffering around that. So another niche that I stepped into is public sector communications. And I'm hosting, and so I'm feeling the fear that maybe Glenn had about hosting events. I'm hosting Ireland's first public sector digital marketing summit in 2 weeks in Dublin. And I designed the program all around the 12 chapters in my book. And you'll notice that I'm recording myself today. The smart thing about Mojos are we create long-form content and we reproduce it. So later today, I will step into the studio of Flirt FM, where I trained as a broadcast journalist, and I'll go back behind the mic. 2 years ago today, I decided to launch a podcast because I had that yearning, and like, what radio station was going to give me my own show about social media and digital marketing? Hell, they weren't, right? So again, I decided that I would do it, and I could. It's had 15,000 downloads. It's not a whole lot, maybe, on the grand scheme of things, but it's 15,000 downloads of people who are interested in digital marketing and social media. And I say, if you subscribe to me, I give you 20 minutes where you can flex your digital marketing and social media muscles for absolutely free. And what's very interesting is that the EPP group in the EU Parliament found me on my podcast. They're the largest political grouping in the world, and they represent 217 MEPs from across the EU. I now train them on how to shift their political communications into social-friendly communications. And that's kind of interesting. So last week I was in Riga in Latvia at their thinking. And you know, influence is now different. Influence isn't the power of the state and the church. Influence is about ordinary people telling a story, sharing their knowledge for absolutely free, and getting people to trust them. We know that brands have this challenge of know, like, and trust. But if we stand up as our true self and share what we know, people get it. And you don't need everybody to like you. Anyway, you can't afford to have everybody to like you. Because if you listen to Tony Robbins, he'll say that you need the haters to help you grow and to make you better. We're opening our smartphones 200 times per day. And if that is a statistic that's surprising to you, then welcome to the world of normal. Okay? Our smartphone is where we go to do everything and to interact with the people in our lives. The mid-funnel is the place where the conversations are happening. And this is why YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world, and that's going to grow. Might it even eclipse its mother, Google? That might happen at some stage. But what will happen when brands and the digital penny finally drops for brands? Will influencers be sidelined, or have we gone far too much way down the road? I think that we'll always have a place. I think because we can engage and we understand and we're relevant to the people that are watching us. So I was watching Fiona's video and I was like, you know, you couldn't have a parenting brand tell the story the way that she tells the story, right? So now this is why influencers are getting hired. Because I used to be a journalist and I used to have the power to decide whether the story went on the radio or not. But now we are going straight to the audience and straight to the people. So my last ask of you is, if you're interested in digital marketing and social media, why don't you subscribe to JSB Talks Digital every Friday? And the guys are absolutely right. You got to show up on time every time, and your audience will follow you. And I'm hoping to change the people that hold power in the world with my work in public sector and digital communications. And my tagline for it is working with the people who are changing the world one digital message at the time. So wish me luck in 2 weeks, and hopefully I can fill a room just like Glenn did. Thank you.
Social media tool of the week.
The social media tool that saved my working week this week is Ferret. This recommendation was given to me by RTE Morning Ireland mobile reporter and producer Cian McCormack. I met Cian at Mojofest, and he showed me how he uses the Ferret app when reporting from the field. Ferret suits Mojo reporters as it makes it fast and easy to record and edit audio on the move, while making powerful features like effects and automation available when you need them. As a content creator that's always on the move, I decided to check it out. Ferret focuses on workflow with features to speed you up and a clean user interface designed to get you out of your own way. If you want to find out more, and remember it's only for iOS users, go to the app creator's website, and that's wooji-juice.com, and I have a link to it on the blog post associated with this podcast over at digitaltraining.ie. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode number 103 of JSB Talks Digital. As always, I have everything discussed on today's show on my award-winning blog over at digitaltraining.ie. Thank you for continuing to listen to the podcast, but make sure that you engage with me on social media between each Friday when I speak to you. You can find me on Twitter at tweetsbyJSB. You can jump over to our Facebook page, Digital Training Institute. You can also snap me to JSB Snaps, or why not send me a boomerang to JSB Grams. I'm Joanne Sweeney-Burke. This is JSB Talks Digital. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
JSB Talks Digital.